So Abraham Maslow said, in any given moment, we have two options: to step forward into growth or to step back into safety. And I think part of what we're going to try and do today is give you some frameworks and ideas on how to step forward bravely, safely, with confidence. So my name's Stuart Easton, and I'm the CEO and one of the founders here at Transparent Choice. We do these webinars every month. They're not about our product or our company or anything like that. It's really just things that are interesting in and around project management, portfolio management, strategy execution, those kind of areas. So if you're into change, delivering change and transformation, which most people on this session are, then this is a great place for you to come. And I encourage you to come back again and again and again. Ashok, for example, comes to almost everything that we do. So it's always great to see him piling in here. And I'm sure he will be very chatty as the session gets going and asking questions. And that's key, right? I want you to be involved. Get in there, ask questions, make comments. If Rebecca says something you like, let's have some thumbs up and hearts floating up the screen. If she says something ridiculous, you know what to do. All right, but make it fun. Let's have some fun. Let's have comments. If you've got stories that reflect what we're talking about, please share them in the chat, right? And where I can, I will integrate that into the conversation. All right. So those are the ground rules. Give me a quick thumbs up or a quick heart on the screen to let me know that you got it. There we go. We got some thumbs ups. Fabulous. I've got a good feeling. Thank you, guys. So let me introduce our guest. Rebecca is on mute, just in case you're not aware, Rebecca, you are still on mute. Rebecca is on mute, and Rebecca runs Rebecca Reynolds Consulting, which is an organization that works with leaders of mostly government agencies and not-for-profits and things like that, with executive teams who are wrestling with change, who are wrestling to deliver the change and to deliver the results, the business results that they're trying to achieve. I call her the executive whisperer because her job is to say the things to the execs that perhaps other people can't say, to have the conversations and the hard conversations that other people might not be able to have with the executives safely. We've worked on a couple of projects, and Rebecca can tell you a little bit about some of that. We've worked on a couple of projects together, bringing communities through change, not just the leadership team, but whole communities through change. And for today, there are really a couple of three dimensions that I want to bring out. So the first is, change is happening. How should you be thinking about change so that you can navigate it more easily? But also, most of the people on this session are project leaders or portfolio leaders or transformation leaders. So you are leaders of change. So what should you be doing as leaders of change to help others get through the process? And then thirdly, what I hope we're going to be able to do is weave in just a little bit of the perspective from that executive tier, right? What does it feel like as an executive to be navigating through change? Because they don't get, they're making decisions in extreme uncertainty, conditions of extreme uncertainty. And yet they have to try and project clarity and direction and everything else so that an organization can align behind that. And it's not easy. That's a difficult thing to do. So with time, we'll weave some of that in as well. So with that, Rebecca, I would like to invite you to introduce yourself a little bit in a more eloquent way than I have. Anyone, by the way, who's into 17th century opera singers, I think it was, Rebecca, if you have any questions on
18th, but whatever.
18th century, okay, 18th century. They've got to be Italian though, I'm afraid. So 18th century Italian opera singers, if you have any questions on that front as well, lob them into the chat and we'll try and stump the chump later on. Go for it, Rebecca.
Well, thank you, Stuart. This is just so much fun. I've been really looking forward to this, and I'm delighted to get to talk with your community today and hear from them about, where they are. And also, I want to just give you a shout out for the May newsletter that came out. It had some really cool connections and synergies, and the theme was very much what we're doing. So if you guys haven't seen that, it's awesome. So thank you. I'm going to just do a little 10-minute kind of frame for our conversation. It'll bring up some concepts, some ideas. Also, it'll talk a little bit about where I came from and how I got this sort of change expert or change guru sort of thing going on. So I'm going to just share my screen really quickly, and we're going to look at just have a little visual as I'm going through some of this stuff. All right, here we go. See if it's going to do it.
Got it.
It's just taking a sec.
No, we can see it. You're
okay, great. All right. So let's see here. So by way of background, as Stuart said, I'm the CEO of my consulting firm that's been around since 1991. I had a couple of jobs before I realized that I really liked change myself. So I realized being a consultant meant that I would get to do lots of different jobs over my career without looking like a flipperty-gibbet. So that's why I became a consultant. I mean, it was that simple. And after a few years of I started in working with nonprofit organizations because that's where my jobs had been. I'd been an executive director in an arts organization. But I started to realize that I was developing these sort of core competencies in my firm. One was leadership advancement. So really working to grow great leaders. So working with people, I think, he said I'm a, sort of executive whisperer. I do think that's right. I've spent my whole career working, more or less with C-suite type folks, but also, moving that down, because the second thing that often I noticed was the reason great leaders were calling me the reason leaders were calling me and were feeling stumped was because they were facing something huge that was kind of insinuating that some sort of organizational transformation was going to need to happen. And I think they were feeling like, whoa, right? I need some help with that. And then 3, when you're doing organizational transformation, you've got to get collaborative, because one person at the top cannot see it all and doesn't know everything. And we've seen that the catastrophic results of C-suite just thinking they know everything, right? And then implementing a change, and it doesn't work, right? And there's all this pushback, and it can even kill the organization. We've seen that. So these 3
so
things.
let's just pause there. So give us a thumbs up, or actually Mary's in there with an amen, right? Give us a quick thumbs up if that resonates with you. What Rebecca just said resonates, because that I hear that kind of thing all the time. There we go. Lots of thumbs up kicking around that one.
And what I think was happening a lot of times is that these leaders maybe had a sense of what was happening, but they also had a sense that they didn't have yet the capacity themselves to take it on. And so there was no language for this. People would say, I think we need to do strategic planning. That was always a sign to me that something was afoot, because they really didn't know what it was. So strategic planning, right, is about looking at the terrain. So my job was to support these folks, these leaders, in pretty much facing large scale change, large scale reinvention type situations. The other thing I want to say, though, is a core piece of my work was getting lasting solutions. And the only way you can do that is if you make sure that whatever is being done is aligned and works through the entire organization. Like what we were talking about when we first were planning this was the head cannot be separated from the body. So I was acting kind of like the neck, you know what I mean? Getting that flow up and down, so that we can, that's what creates agility in an organization. So let me just move on. The first time I worked with Stuart, I had used some decision software before, and I really liked it. I was really blown away by what was possible with it. But I was looking for something new, something a little bit more agile, easier to use. And I had a federal government client that needed to prioritize projects across a 2.5 million acre landscape of mixed jurisdictions. They weren't just dealing with their stewardship land. They were dealing with private and industry stuff and all kinds of different stakeholders. And that was very important. So that presented 2 primary challenges. Number 1, we wanted to make sure that clear strategic outcomes were driving the prioritization, not just low-hanging fruit, which is a very typical way, right, as you guys all know, to choose projects, something that's easy, something that's, not too expensive, whatever. Or the thing about in my backyard, like it's normally, I don't want it in my backyard, but these treatment projects were about restoring land to prevent wildfire and other things. So people wanted them in their backyard. And so we had a lot of deep opinion and vested, right, interest in that. So managing that with clear, strategic, and agreed upon outcomes was going to be critical. The second one was involving hundreds of diverse individuals, some of whom were very deep SMEs on forestry and water chemistry and so on. And then there are other people that just, were lay people who lived there and had, sort of their hat in the ring, if you will. The cool part was, this was my first experience of working with Stuart. We had a gas, it was really fun talking about everything. And I was really pushing for Transparent Choice to help me do that strategic alignment and integration. And so we came up with all kinds of cool, clever, and very efficient methods using Transparent Choice, and we're able to accomplish both of these objectives. The other thing that was great, and anybody that's used Transparent Choice knows that our results were inclusive, they were clear, they were compellingly conveyed in cool graphics, and all of that made the priorities obvious. At the end of this process, it took time. I'm not saying this stuff is fast, but we had no pushback, zero. It was unprecedented. So that was my first experience working with.
And if I can jump in for a second, Rebecca, right? So right away, we've hooked into something about making change happen, is that I think most people are not actually resistant to change. They're resistant to having change done to them, right? So if you take them on the journey with you, so they are part of the change, then actually we can deal with it, right? And I suspect we're going to cover that later on, but that was so clearly demonstrated on this, that involving people in the process meant that change wasn't being done to them, and they were hearing other people's points of view, not just sitting in their own little echo chamber, but they were hearing other people's point of view. So when they didn't get exactly what they wanted, they kind of understood why, right? And could go,
That's
yeah,
exactly
okay, that
right.
makes sense, right?
And they actually saw the benefits of doing it somewhere else for themselves. That was the cool part. It wasn't just like, oh, I'm being a nice guy or nice gal. They were actually seeing, oh, if we do that first, that's going to make my project easier when it comes into the queue. So yes, it was socializing, it was building understanding. It's what I call moving the change process through the entire system, not just at the top. Okay, so we'll get more to that for sure.
We'll get to that. Keep going, keep going.
So now, how did I start? When I first hung my shingle, I was not saying, hey, I'm a change agent. I knew I liked it, but I didn't realize that that's actually what I was doing. It took me a while to discover that. But these words that you're seeing on the screen have been on my website since the beginning for 30 years. So 30 years ago, when I started this, I was noticing the pace and scale of change are continuing to increase. And I want to talk about that very specifically. I also said that staying abreast of the change curve, that's exactly how I wrote it, is a highly evolved skill. And leaders must have it, because why else do you have leaders unless they can move you through change and keep abreast of it? If you're driving a car and you only look in front of the car, you're going to hit something pretty soon, right? The leader is supposed to be, the driver is supposed to be looking out and looking, using peripheral vision. So it's definitely a skill for leaders, but it is also a skill for the entire organization. And that is something I felt very strongly about from the get-go. And then third, this particular skill I noticed was often the difference between average performance and extraordinary results. So that was a harbinger. I mean, that was actually a tenet of my work, is that people would say to me, we got so much more than we ever thought was possible. I don't know how you did that. So I didn't either, actually, at the time, but I started to, really think about that. So I want to say that I sort of realized that I was doing change, and that was what I was particularly good at. So if I get a call from somebody and I would say, if you just want to move pieces around the board, if that's all that's needed, you don't need me. But if you need to question the board itself, that's my work, right? So I started to get that about my concentration. And so what do I mean by large scale change or reinvention? I think we've all known when an organization hits some kind of major world force or technology trend or something that means they're going to have to really look at their business model, product line, whatever it is. Also, though, I was working with a lot of government clients that were in charge of sort of setting the frame for large areas in natural resource management, in IT, et cetera. And so they were having to really push brand new policy, law, regulation, right? So it was both an internal kind of change, that was the reinvention, or it was something that was going to be pushed out to, guide a whole bunch of people. So these were very large projects that were very complex, involving lots of moving pieces. So let's see, I want to make sure, so I want to make sure I was very clear that it was very clear to me from the beginning that you couldn't just have that change agility nor that strategic viewpoint just at the top, because the strategic plan needs to be owned by everybody, because it provides a strategic map of what you're dealing with. First of all, if you have no map, right, it's going to be very difficult to make a change because you don't know where you are, right? So the strategic plan is that map, right? If it's only for the top, they'll say, well, we need to make a change over here and do it right away, and here's how. And the people that are in that area, they don't see it. They don't understand it. So it just feels sort of like an attack, like change is happening to them, as Stuart said. So when I was doing strategic plans, I was engaging the entire system. And that's why transparent choice was so important, because at first, when these tools didn't exist, I was doing it all myself. I mean, it was intense work doing that. All right, so let me just move to this last one so that we can move into our more interactive conversation. So it was I think about 2013 that I finally really started to say, all right, how can I make this thing that I do and that I use, and it's very effective across all kinds of content and context. I worked in every subject matter, and my clients would say, have you ever done IT before? Have you ever done fire stuff before? Have you ever done water? And I'd be like, well, no, but I've done things similar. But I realized the content really was not that relevant because I was using something else. So I started to ask myself, what is it that I'm using that makes this easier and makes for greater results? Well, I came to the realization that what I was working with was something I refer to as the change process. I don't mean how we react to change. That's very, very different across people, right? There's changes in our own lives that we love and change that we dread, right? So if you use our reaction to change to understand it, it's gonna be really confusing and very variable. So I started to notice that change, like climate, moves through a sequence of very specific stages that have indicators that are common across content and context, whether you like the change or don't. And that's what I was using. So I was helping my clients. I didn't teach this to them because I didn't have any language for it at the time. But what I did is I helped them to align with what part of the change process they were in, just like the farmer doesn't plant in winter if the farmer's in North America. That's a very bad idea, right? And we all know that. If you don't align with the seasons, or you wear a fur coat on the beach in June, you're going to be uncomfortable. So we know that about climate, but with change, we don't. So I realized this was like change GPS. We could figure out, where are we in it? What is the stage asking of us? And when we start aligning with it, it became so much easier. And all the energy that had been going to resisting change, whether intentionally or not, could now go into working with change. That's why we were getting incredible results. It was that simple. So I basically invented a model for something that is not new. The change process happens all the time to everything. As Stuart put in some of the posts, change is a constant. It's the only thing that's constant. Heraclitus said that. So we've known this for a long time, right? But we are a little slow on the uptake on how to work with it. So anyway, the thresholds of change is a 4-stage process that is iterative, and we go round and round, and being able to know where you are, where any particular situation in it makes it much easier to deal with. So I just will say, there's a book on this. It's out right now, Thresholds of Change. Audiobooks coming if you like those. And then also you can, I'd love to support people in this work. So that's all I'll say, and now we can move on.
Awesome, awesome. So that's fantastic. Good intro. Good starter for 10, as they say. The Brits will know what that means. So Ashok has fallen for your little bait there. He's already asked what liminal means, so we'll get to that, Ashok, I promise. Before we do, just really quickly, right? So most of the people on this webinar are in the business of making change happen, projects, transformation, that kind of thing, right? So the feeling out there is that, change is just coming faster and faster and faster. The nature of that change is itself changing. The pace is changing. The complexity is increasing. So is that just, doesn't everybody always feel that, or is that real, do you think?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. Like I said, 30 years ago, I was talking about pace and scale. What I started to, when I've been teaching this now, I'm just starting to get into this more. I looked at some statistics about pace. The pace of change is increasing, and the reason is technology, right? If you think how long it took us to invent the wheel as humanity, and then the distance between the wheel and the printing press, right? So the wheel was like this, right? Then the printing wheel and printing press. Now we've got changes, boom, 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 boom. And they're just exploding. Like the internet exploded us, but now look at AI, right? So you're not wrong if you think the pace of change is increasing. It definitely is. The other aspect of why change feels like change to the fourth power, as Stuart mentioned in his newsletter today, is ubiquity. It's everywhere. Now, why is that? Change has always been everywhere, always. Everything changes, every part of life, but technology is also helping us be aware of it. We hear about it on the internet, we hear about it in news, we see it on social media, we're hearing, it's just constantly, humans are barraged by change happening all over the place all the time. The third aspect of why change feels more is scale, right? That we have reached a place, also, I think because of technology, that we were built to change ourselves and our little situations, right? So our families, our little jobs, for millennia, humans had a little sphere of what they were good at in terms of managing change or dealing with change. Now, all of a sudden, we are aware of and struck by scales of change that are global. We're all dealing with global environmental change, right? Impacts and the ideas of it. And so our little muscle for dealing with change is not necessarily built for dealing with the scale. So I think it's those three aspects that make change so much harder, and why I felt it was so important to write this book, so that I could help people more to deal with the process of change. We need to build our musculature more.
So a question for the audience then, right? So, jump into chat and just give me a yeah if you feel like change is a little overwhelming, if it just all feels a bit too much sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes. I'm going to put my own hand up and say, absolutely, all the time. So just drop something in. Yeah, sometimes. Thanks, Ashok. Anyone else willing to admit it? Because I know you wouldn't be here if you didn't feel like that sometimes, right? There we go. Nice one. Yeah, good one, Kevin. Yeah, absolutely. So the first message, I think, is you are not alone. This is normal. Everyone feels like this. It's real. There is a lot of change out there. And figuring out how to deal with it is one of the key challenges of our time. This is a good time to dive into this. So Rebecca, here's a quick question, right? Change comes in so many different guises, right? So many different types. There's technology change, there's organizational change, there's change at home. Are there any sort of common threads and themes that you have seen that sort of tie them all together?
Well, that's exactly what the change process does. It's the underlying process that's under all change, no matter what scale, what it's about. That's what enabled me to go into organization after organization, dealing with very different content, very often very complex content, and still be able to see the way through, right? Because I was using this underlying change process. It is what is common.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm reading the comments
Me too. Yeah.
while listening. Yeah, so I think that's I love actually, Joe. I love what you said there, which is that you have to learn how to handle the change, and part of that is about learning how to handle yourself. But also, one of the things that I liked in the book is that you've sort of broken it down into stages, and we're going to get into that liminal thing in a second. And I've got to warn you guys, just there may be a little bit of geeking out at some point here. Rebecca and I are both a little bit nerdy, a little bit kind of intellectual at times. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know. But let's put it this way: when I found that word, the first thing I did was jump onto the online dictionaries, discover that different dictionaries had very different definitions of the word. And so then dived into the etymology and the root of where it came from and all that kind of good stuff. So we were going to get to liminal. If you don't know what it means, don't worry, neither did I. We're going to get there. But talk to us about the different stages, the different phases of change.
Right. So just like I said, climate moves through the seasons, change moves through stages. And I was really feeling those over every project for years and years. And it took me a while to bring it to my conscious mind and to create a model. And I love creating models for stuff that I am kind of a geek that way. So when people would bring me in, it was usually an instigation. That's the first stage. So how do we recognize instigation in any change situation? Something that has worked or something that was stable is no longer. It's as simple as that. You go out, you try to start your car, it doesn't start, and you're like, uh-oh, what's going on here, right? So it can be something small. You might get on the scale and be like, whoops, gained some weight, right? Or lost some weight or whatever. So it can be small like that, or it can
Thank
be
you,
in your
Rebecca.
organization. I was talking specifically, yeah, to Stuart, exactly. Or it can be something big in your organization. And it might be something that happens one day and it's catastrophic. So you're in it fast, or it can be subtle. It can be things that happen over time. So you're kind of watching for, did this thing that happened, this event, is it actually repeating? So it's becoming a trend. So instigation is very much for noticing. Now, if you don't have any kind of a strategic map for your organization, nobody's sort of keeping their eye out on the road, it's going to be harder for you to notice these signs of instigation happening, right? Makes perfect sense. So that's why a lot of people, individuals, and organizations feel broadsided. I didn't see that coming. And I'll go in and say, let's look back and see. And they'll actually, in retrospect, be able to see some of the signs of change. So noticing is a huge faculty. And also the other thing is not thinking we know exactly what those signs mean. We have to belay our sense of, I got this, I know what this is, because that's often reductive of what these signs are actually showing us. So, I could go on and on about this, so I don't want to. But instigation is where I was often brought in, because what the next threshold is into what I call the liminal. Now, why did I name it such a kind of use such an unusual word? Number one, I wanted to call attention to it. And I knew that if I used a word that was well known, people would go, oh yeah, I got that. And I don't think we got that. Particularly in Western, European cultures, we tend to be a bit on the analytical side and think we know everything, especially once we reach a certain level of our career, certain educational, right? And the whole point of change is we're going into something we don't know. And there's a reason for that. Change is the agent of our growth and our learning. So by definition, we have to go into something that we don't know. And leaders, especially execs, saying, whoa, I really don't know, that's a scary place to start. But it's a really important one, because that's where the growth and the opening starts to happen. So I use the term liminal. It's from the Latin word for threshold. Limen means threshold, or limen maybe is how you pronounce it, I'm not sure. So it's also used in anthropology by anthropologists to describe the state in a rite of passage, right? Maybe from adolescence to adulthood, when the individual is neither one nor the other. And you all who are parents understand how painful that period is. They're not children anymore, but they're not adults either. We call those the teenage years. So in the old, all of the old cultures, there were rituals to support that transition, right? And that was really smart because the liminal is a time of confusion. The I know mind doesn't know what's going on really. It's new to it, so it can freak out. And depending upon your comfort with not knowing, that's probably dictating your reaction to change, right? So that's the liminal. The liminal is actually a space of actually receiving what's going on as opposed to initiating. And that's very difficult in business to find ways to get people into more of a receptive mode. Frankly, the easiest way I found is strategic planning, because you bring people out of their normal moments, their normal day to day, you put them in a space that's sort of, this special little container where they do strategic planning. And my strategic planning is simply asking questions of leaders, and they have to talk about it and answer them together. And that often opens, right, them to whole new ideas and revelations. So after we're in the liminal for whatever, do you want me to stop there?
Yeah, no. I was going to jump in before we get into the next couple of stages.
Yep.
There's a couple of comments in the chat which I think we can throw in here. So Mary was sort of saying, good with most change, but what I don't like is essentially when change is done to you. So arbitrary looking decisions are handed down. There's lack of process, lack of inclusion, lack of information gathering, all that kind of good stuff. Right. So there's that. So that's an interesting point. And I think it underlines what you were just saying about both the instigation and that liminal phase, right? Is we need to be listening. Then Ashok asked the question, is change known at the start or evolves as we go? And the answer by definition is a little bit of both. You start off knowing that change is coming, but you don't quite know what it's going to be. And when Rebecca's talking about the strategic planning process, that's really a process of discovery. It's which is why you were talking about it as questions, right? It's a process of discovery and listening, and done well, it's a process of collaborating with different levels of the organization. Because at the end of the day, let's be honest, and I want to see lots of hearts fly when I say this, let's be honest, the executives don't actually know how the business works at a day-to-day level, right? So they need to be involving the people in the guts of the organization or the community or whatever it is, because they're the people who know where the bodies are buried. They're the people who know where the roadblocks are. They're the people that know that if you turn off that little switch over there, this thing over here catches fire, right? The execs don't know that. That's not their job to know that. They have another job. They've got a different set of things that they need to do. So it has to be this sort of if it's going to work well, it has to be inclusive. And
well, I also think the other thing that I want to stress is the leaders have to be willing to admit that they don't know. That's a very, very important threshold for them. And that is actually what gets you into the liminal. When you finally say, I have just tried everything. And I'll come into organizations who have literally been trying to solve the problem for a decade. And they're just so exhausted. And so I come in and I'm like, oh, I got you just where I want you. Right. So and I wanted to also respond to Ashok's comment about, first of all, yes, herding cats. I used to remember that commercial that they did. I think it was a Wrangler commercial, or I don't remember. But anyway, they had a herd of cats and there was a cowboy herding. It was hilarious. I used to start my meetings with it. Because what that is saying is there's so many different inputs and they're coming from all over the place and nobody can make sense of them. Well, that was my job, was to do that. But I also want to say strategic planning is not about options yet. It's too soon for options. Strategic planning is about seeing the map. It's seeing the landscape, right? And getting a sense of where we want to head on that landscape. Once we've got that, and it's a shared understanding that has grown our viewpoint and our viewshed, then we can start looking at options. So I find that in strategic planning, we try to get to options too fast, and then we're like just sort of trying to, I don't know, pick them, and we're not using any common frame of reference. So that's been my experience.
That's really key. So I'm going to bring this down a level, because I know there are some people on here who are sort of project leaders and portfolio leaders. And so what Rebecca just talked about is absolutely critical, right? If you own a portfolio of projects and you've got responsibility for delivering, maximizing the impact from that portfolio to the organization, if the organization doesn't actually know what impact it wants, how can you maximize the value? You can't. And sometimes getting the leadership team to understand the impact of their behavior on simple things like project success rates, project delays, overruns, things like that, right? Things that as PMOs you might get measured on, right? Is things like, was my project delivered on time and to scope and things like that, right? Usually the root cause of those delays and overruns is the fact that the organization doesn't really know what it's trying to achieve. It's trying to do too much all at once instead of staggering it. And so you get resource collisions and change overload and everything falls apart. So how do we get the leadership team to listen? If you're in that PMO role, right, how do you get the leadership team to listen and to engage in this conversation about putting a little more structure around it? Now we've got a little process that we go through. If Lenora's on, if you could paste that link again, Lenora, we call it the case for change, which is it's basically a little workshop that we take you through to prepare your conversation with the leadership team so that you can make it visible that, you know, the reason that the things aren't landing that you want to land is because the fundamental planning isn't in place, right? And to ask for the help to change that. You're not saying you guys are idiots, you're not doing your job. We're not saying, we're not saying that, but we're helping them understand the causal link between the organization's inability to deliver the goals that they want with their inability to give you the clarity that you need, right? And to be inclusive and to take you with them on the journey. So Lenora will drop that into the chat in a moment, but do click on that link and book yourself a case for change. This is free. We do it, and you get an hour for free to walk through that. And awesome. It'll get you set up to start the process. And Ashok, who's on here, I think he went through a little workshop where we did it with a group of people. So, we do this all the time. So if you're in that position, click on the link. I know Lenora put it in there a little earlier. She's maybe gone off to make a cup of tea or something. But it's in the chat a little higher up if you have a look. So let's come back, Rebecca, to kind of the rest of the process. So we got to this sort of liminal phase where we're sort of in transition. We know that we can't stay where we are, but we need to kind of move on to something else. Then what?
So, well, I just want to say also, one of the things that the two first stages, instigation and liminal, are the hardest. Not when we want change. When we want change, we fly through these, right? In instigation, we're seeing signs of change and we get excited and we're thrilled, like, oh, maybe I'm going to get a new job or I'm going to move to a new place. So I just want to be clear. Change is not always any one thing. It is completely dependent on situation and the person or people who are heading into it. And that's another thing that I found in my organizations is that there were people, for some, who felt like, oh, this change is a no-brainer. It's like, I'm happy to do it. Let's go. And they'd be really impatient. And then other people would be like, this is huge. It's impossible. I can't do it. So the thing that's operating, there's a lot of emotion in change, a lot. And it can be so much that what we see is actually numbing, because people have been so unable to change for so long. The only way they can manage themselves in the organization is to go numb. It's one of the saddest things that I see when I go into organizations is you're basically death by unwillingness to change. So, but I'm also dealing with defensiveness and anger and, cynicism and, we can't. All this stuff is really preventing us from from moving into the change process. So once we've actually been in the liminal and really done that well, and I would say that that's one of the hardest things that's ever done, especially in corporate, because the timetable of corporate is fast. So one of the things I always ask the people that hire me, I say, are you willing to put the time into this? And do you have the stamina? Because this ain't going to be fast. If you want a fast fix, go to somebody else. Because what I'm seeing here is that your whole organization needs to go through this change process together, and that's going to take some time. But on the other side, you're going to get stuff that's going to blow your doors off. So it's up to you. You know, I always just say it's up to you. So we have to be able to deal with the emotions that come through. And that's another reason I'm often hired, because a lot of people in the C-suite don't have those skills, and they know they don't. And so big change and involving lots of people scares them because they don't know how to manage all this stuff, and they don't know what it means, right? So that's one of the great gifts when you can help people, you know, to get across. Now, once you've been in the liminal for a while, what I always notice is that the metabolization stage just starts to show up. And metabolization shows up in a different kind of energy. People start, instead of being dark and kind of heavy and confused and bummed or whatever it is, low energy, all of a sudden they start to laugh. Things start to be funny. Things that were really serious and really annoying and really difficult, all of a sudden they see a funnier side to it. They also start getting like ideas that they never had thought of before. Or they'll tell me stories of things they've been able to do that they've wanted to be able to do and couldn't. Like one guy was a head of, was a CIO, and he'd go into his management team presenting his budget, and he would just get raked over the coals. They didn't understand what he was doing. They didn't like what he was doing, and they never gave him money. And it was just so hard for him. He was just beaten down. So he went through the liminal process. And one day he calls me and he goes, Rebecca, you're not going to believe this. He had gotten his whole budget. He'd had an interesting phone call. And I knew that was a sign that he had changed, but he couldn't see it. So I had to talk to him about, all right, what are you doing that's different, so that he could actually own it and nurture it and incorporate it. So metabolization is exactly that. It is metabolizing the change in the system, whether that's an individual, like a leader, or in an entire organization. And it takes as long as it takes to do that sort of metabolization. And we can all recognize, you know, we'll say, wow, I did something and I have absolutely no idea how that happened. That's the sign that we're moving into a new space.
So related to that, actually, Kevin just shared something here that you know, there's another fundamental thing at play, which is people deciding or not to accept the change, right? Making sense of change. So that's something that you talk about quite a lot, right? Is almost like a grieving process sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I also love what he's saying here about organizational changes made up of an accumulation of individual changes. So I'm so glad you said that, Kevin, because I always thought of myself like a conductor of an orchestra. You know, the conductor has the score, and the score for me was the change process. Okay. So I'm working to get them through that process. And while I'm working with the entire orchestra, which is the organization, I'm also working with the string section, the timpani, right? I'm also working with individual musicians. I'm talking to the horn, you know, the trumpeter or whatever, right? So just like a conductor, we've got to be able to synchronize and work with all of the change inputs. So if we've got somebody, for instance, who's involved in a change, in bringing about a large scale change in an organization, and they're going through a deep personal change, like they've gotten a divorce, they've gotten an illness, a diagnosis of something, they're looking at retirement, those people are also going through change, and that's going to have an impact on the larger system. So I think, I mean, I don't know if that's exactly what you were meaning, but that's what it looked like for me. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly
I like
right.
that. That's great. Well, and so I know Kevin, so thank you for the comments, Kevin. So part of the challenge there is not just implementing change as a project leader and a project and portfolio leader, not just implementing change and making an environment that is conducive to change happening, but also helping the executives change their behavior. And so what do you, in your experience, are there any tips for how to really wake up the leadership team without committing career suicide?
Yeah, I think that's really, really tricky, but we call that leading from, different places in the organization. And I completely believe in that. And I think you alluded to it earlier, Stuart, when you said, just asking questions, not questions that are, loaded with accusation or blame or, you're a bunch of idiots, but really asking for that direction and saying, we feel a bit confused down here. Could you help us with, and then asking for those questions. That's a beginning, or else showing relationship between what you're trying to do and what you need from them, and just saying, if we could get this, we'd really be able to rock and roll. So you're showing causation, you're showing you're being gentle. I also think you need to read the room. I mean, if you've got execs that are just completely think they know what they're doing and they're very shrouded, they don't open their decisions to anybody, that's not a great situation, right? They need a consultant to come in and kick their, what?
You know what, that sometimes that is the answer. Bring someone from outside.
Yeah, because there's no risk for me. I would say to people, if you don't like what I'm saying, fire me. I'll walk out the door right now, but here's what you got to hear. And
Absolutely.
my guys generally would be like, oh God, she's right. But I also want to talk, you asked me to mention something about what goes on in the C-suite, right? These are people. They're people just like all of us. They're no different. And they have everything we have. So when I was working with one guy in particular, he knew that there was a huge change in front of his organization that he was not fully able to bring about or even to get behind yet. And the guy started getting migraines, intense migraines, so badly he had to stay at home. And I said to him, I think these migraines are, your brain is sort of exploding. And that's a good thing. I said, I know migraines are horrible, but just ride through it, relax, know that I've got this over here for the time that you need to step away. And it was really amazing. He did get through it. It took him about 3 months. And he came back and he was like a changed person. He was able to sort of pick up where we were and move forward with it. So, I mean, I have seen some really bizarre things when people are going through change.
Absolutely. There's another little comment or question saying, is change, do you see change being easier when the people where the change is affecting have a stake in it, have a voice in it? And I think, I mean, my view on that is really, really a very, very loud yes, right? So leadership teams selecting projects, right? They said, or doing even above that, doing the strategic planning, right? If they're not involving people from across the business, then the chances are there's going to be pushback to bits of the decision, right? But even within a project, if you're imagine your sales team, or there's a bunch of people for the NHS, right? Imagine someone just says, great, we're going to buy a new machine that goes ping for the cardiologist. If the cardiologists weren't involved in that decision, what's going to happen, right? That machine that goes ping isn't going to go ping. So the getting people involved is really critical to landing change.
I also want to say that's another place where leaders often feel nervous, because once you open that door, if they don't know how to herd cats, right, or they don't have any tools to help them, then it's just like, oh, where am I? So I just want to say again, right, that providing leaders with ways to involve people that are efficient and that are productive, and not just sort of like a, getting people's all their little fussy things and then it just ends up being a mess, is a big hurdle. I also want to say that when you say this, a stake in the business area, one of the, I think, really big challenges and also big gifts of leadership is to be able to make the connections between areas. It's like, let's go back to the orchestra metaphor. If the timpani think that everybody's boring and that they're loud and they're cool and they're better than the strings, right, you're going to have a problem. So, but timpani understands the role of strings understands timpani, understands horns. Everybody kind of appreciates all the musicians, right, even if they're not an expert in that area, right? Then we have a chance to do a great symphony, right?
Absolutely. So we've talked a little bit about, there are different phases to change. We've talked a bit about, inclusion. We've talked about the importance of inclusion. Talked about the importance of having a vision for where we're going to, but not having that vision just arbitrarily, but taking time to develop, learn, get different perspectives on that vision.
Mhm.
And which, again, is where a really good consultant can help, and really good software can help structure that process in a way that's so, this is what we do all the time. Um, but then let's take this sort of along a couple of notches, and because we've got about 10 minutes left. So let's talk a little bit about, okay, you're a manager, you're managing a portfolio of projects. What are the things that you should be thinking about as a leader of people who are doing change to other people? What are the things that you should be thinking about? The capabilities you should be thinking about building in the organization, the training maybe that we give to project managers, the culture of having change management and project management working together rather than fighting for who's better, right? All of these things. So what are your thoughts there? So real practical, making stuff happen advice.
Well, I guess I would say that alignment all the way down an organization based on that sort of change ability. That's what I call it, change ability, ability with change is really critical. And if you're running anything, if you're managing anything, having a facility with change is absolutely imperative. And what I find, unfortunately, is that we don't hire with that in mind. We don't hire for, am I looking at somebody who's got capability in dealing with change, not only in themselves, right? Because we have a lot of people who are just, I'm really good at change and what's wrong with everybody else? Well, that's no good, right? Everybody has different change aptitude, just like we do with sports or numbers or even fear of heights, right? Everybody's different. We want people in the lead who are good with change because it's going to happen, right? And to build that capability, no matter at what level you're at, just thinking that change is being led at the C-suite is nuts. Change is happening all the time, everywhere, at every scale, at every level. We all know that. So making it sort of like a baseline criterion for hiring people who are in charge of other people and in charge of areas, to me seems like critical. And if you are in that area and you feel threatened by or freaked out by, or your main response to change is not good, I would say you need to up your game and change to be able to do your job well. And that's what thresholds of change is for, is to help you see the change process, help you see those indicators, see what needs to be done in each of those stages. That's would be my recommendation, is that you do a course on change, right?
Excellent. All right, Ashok, I'm going to ignore that comment. But
Aw, that's excellent. Yes, we should.
yeah, it sounds good. Bit of rock and roll guitar and an operatic voice would be fantastic.
I used to be in a rock band too, so I can do both.
We can
Yeah,
do both.
yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. I do enjoy a little bit of opera myself,
Cool, cool.
but not at the level that you do. Fantastic. So the key, I think, is just setting that culture of change and the expectation of inclusion, right? So, if I'm a project manager implementing a project, it's not my job to force people to do something. Your job is to serve people to enable change, right?
Right.
Not to force change, it's to enable change. And that means changing people. So Ashok, I get where you're coming from with the comment about, it's about data. That's part of it. But you've got to carry the head. That's where the data comes in. But you've also got to carry the heart,
And the whole, yeah.
right? You got to it's what you were saying earlier, that connecting the head with the body, and this process, if you like, of managing change is the neck that connects the two. So
I
you've got
don't,
the
I'd
head.
also like to speak to Mary's comment really quick before we end, because it's
Go for
very
it.
much about you and Transparent Choice, and the people that are my folks that are on here today, I think came to learn about it. I just want to say that the thing that's extraordinary to me about decision software, and so much fun about working with Transparent Choice and Stuart and his team is that it is not making the decision for you. What it is doing is it is exposing some of the elements of decision making that are very hard to see unless they're built into a software. If you have to load a software with strategic criteria that make sense and that are shared, now all of a sudden you got to do that, which is what a lot of leaders aren't doing, right? So that's a beautiful thing. The other thing that Transparent Choice is so great for, and I said this very early in the conversation today, is you can bring in hundreds of people into a decision space efficiently. And when you have big change, you want to bring in lots of people, not just inside the organization, but also outside. So I encourage anybody that's facing big change and asking a lot of questions to reach out to Stuart, because Transparent Choice is just rocking cool. It is rocking cool. I love it.
That's super nice of you to say. And Mary, thank you for that. Mary, yes, absolutely. In fact, the situations where Rebecca's used it has not been in a for-profit. It was very much around forestry and for mission type organization. And the reason the software works, by the way, is because we're not super clever, but we're clever enough to know that if there's research out there that clever people have done that tells you how to do something, the smart thing is to go and read that research and then build software that does it, right? So the software works because it's built on the psychology research, the decision science research into what actually works, how groups of people make decisions that stick. And I actually have books up on the shelf in front of me here about that and how bad people are at making decisions and why decisions fail. There's at least 2 Nobel laureates up there talking about decision making and how it fails, right? So it's not rocket science. It's well understood, but not well understood by enough people. So come get involved, and that'll be awesome. So just before we wrap up with the thank yous, don't forget to book that case for change. So if you are that, if you're in that sort of portfolio lead role or the transformation role, and you're struggling to get the executives to really focus and support you in this change journey the way you need, book that case for change, and we will help you put together a case for change, right? Make something happen. So with that, I see that all the applause going up. Thank you, Rebecca, for sharing your thoughts and wisdom. That was great. We have a question from Rebecca actually for the audience, which is, we were talking about doing a session on strategy, right? Strategy as a word gets thrown around an awful lot. So what is it? And what do you need to know if you're in the change and transformation space? What do you need to know about strategy? You hear strategic alignment thrown around all the time. What on earth does that actually mean? Who does strategy? Whose job is it? The answer is all of us, by the way. So if you would be interested in that session, drop me a quick yes, please into the chat, and we will make that happen at some point in the future. So there you go. We got at least one little vote in there. Super. So there's a few of those coming in. So that feels like something that we need to do. So we'll bring Rebecca into that, and maybe 1 or 2 others, because that's one where there are as many definitions of strategy as there are people who know how to spell it.
Well, I just want to say too, I'm totally open to chatting with anybody about your situation. I'm fascinated by this stuff. Literally, I'm a geek about change. So, feel free to reach out. I think we put my website and stuff so people can find me. Also, the LinkedIn platform is there. So
Brilliant.
Yeah, I'm really open to talking to anybody.
And Lenora will be sending out an email in the next day or so with the recording and with the slides, so you can pick up Rebecca's details from the slides. And do go get a copy of the book so you can kind of digest some of these ideas on your own time. Definitely worth reading.
Thank you, Stuart.
Rebecca, thank you as ever. It's an absolute pleasure speaking with you. For once, we've managed to keep it to an hour. When we were working together, by the way, Because of the time difference, it was always late at night, my time, and I'd go into a conference call at 8 in the evening, and my wife would say, "Is this with Rebecca?" I'm like, "Yes." Like, I'm just going to bed. I'm not even going to try and wait for you, right? I'd crawl into bed at midnight. So we managed to keep it to an hour. Hey, well done. So thank you, everybody.